Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first session in our workshop, Shared Spaces, Shared Struggles, Understanding Human-Elephant Conflict. And a special welcome to our primary audience, who are students from the Midlands University in Zimbabwe. You're most welcome. And my name is Sarah Malanga, sitting in Malawi, and I'll be your host today. So, students, imagine you're studying late at night and you've made your popcorn so that you should be snacking as you're studying. Then, boom, a monkey comes and snatches your popcorn away and it lashes into the dark. Annoying, right? This isn't just a fun meme. It's a life or death struggle for both humans and animals. From elephant raiding farms to leopards wandering into the cities, human and wildlife are fighting for space, food, and survival. But who is the villain here? Is it humans or is it wildlife? Is there a way that we can coexist? Yeah, that's why we are here, and we have incredible speakers who will be diving into the topic, explaining to us how we can coexist with elephants. So let's jump in. Let's see who are our speakers today. Oh, yes. All right, so today we have 4 speakers. I can see 3. I can say 3. And we have, so Yoranda is a Zimbabwean conservationist who is working to bridge the gap between communities and wildlife. Yoranda is going to share with us grassroots strategies to protect both people and these giants of savannah. And she is a student studying a PhD at the University of Stellenbosch. From Yolanda's talk, at the end, you should be able to identify the key drivers of human-elephant conflict in Zimbabwe and the implications for rural communities, explore the interactions of human and wildlife conflict within the border and human-wildlife conflict context, define the meaningful coexistence entails and examine the institutions of social dynamics that support it. Lastly, you should be able to recognize coexistence as a dynamic, courageous, and collaborative process that requires compromise and long-term commitment. Now, let us welcome Yoranda to the screen. Yoranda, the screen is yours.
Thanks very much, Sela, and a very good morning to all of you. As Sela has said, my name is Yolanda Mutinima, and I am a PhD student at Stellenbosch University, affiliated with the Center for Sustainability Transitions. And I am also a research associate at the African Wildlife Economy Institute here at Stellenbosch. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you today. I actually did my undergrad and my master's in Zimbabwe at Chinua University of Technology not too long ago. So I was sitting in your shoes a few years ago. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you. And I'm also a postgraduate fellow with the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at the University of Oxford, and on a project called Morally Contested Conservation. And my research mainly focuses on human-wildlife coexistence and the contested issues surrounding that. So yeah, I hope that you will find this presentation meaningful. Let's dive in. So before getting into the nitty-gritties of human-elephant conflict, it's important to understand what human-wildlife conflict is. And I mean, there are a couple of definitions, but I've just picked one that I particularly like. And this is by Inskip and Zimmerman, and it says, it's the situation that arises when wildlife poses a direct and recurring threat to the livelihoods of or safety of people who respond by repeatedly persecuting the species that they blame for their losses. And human-wildlife conflict is definitely a pressing global challenge, and is increasingly recognized as a threat to biodiversity. For the first time in 2022, it was included in Target 4 of the coming Montreal Biodiversity Framework as human-wildlife conflict and coexistence, which is such an important step because it's the first time it's recognized in any international legal body. So when it comes to human-elephant conflict, this conflict mainly comprises of conflict over land, with elephants destroying people's crops, which are often their main livelihoods, as well as infrastructure damage, houses, schools, and, of most important, people lose their lives in human-elephant conflict. And as we can tell from the definition, human-wildlife conflict and human-elephant conflict are often two-way, with people causing harm on elephants and elephants causing harm on people. But oftentimes people cause harm in response to the harm that they would have received from elephants. Yeah, and with regards to elephants, it mostly ends up being poisoning or people burning fires, like you can see in the beginning of my slide there. And retaliation. But because elephants are these giant creatures, it's often hard to retaliate against them. And the consequences of retaliating against elephants are hefty. So I view human-elephant conflict as, an equally balanced scale, as opposed to other conflicts with carnivores where people can more easily kill these animals. In Zimbabwe, human-elephant conflict is very topical. It's not something that conservationists will know only, but it's all over the news, and media is flooded with cases of people being killed and trampled on by elephants. And while this looks like any other headline, it is someone's life that's lost, a breadwinner who has lost their lives. And all these headlines are marred by the psychological and mental trauma that comes with encountering conflict with elephants. Like Sela was just saying, imagine you're studying and you can't go outside now, and your studying is disturbed by this huge giant. People live in fear of going to school. People can't go to water holes. People are afraid to go outside to tend to their fields because they might encounter these species. And as you can tell from these headlines, some people are killed in Victoria Falls, Mbire, Kariba. Human-elephant conflict in Zimbabwe, it's widespread, mainly around protected areas. And just anywhere where there's a protected area with elephants, you'll definitely find a human-elephant conflict. But yeah, what are the drivers of human-elephant conflict in Zimbabwe? It would be interesting for you, especially if human-elephant conflict ends up being one of your final year projects, to take a look at this paper by Schaffer et al. They do a big review on human-elephant conflict and come up with these drivers, which I agree with. And some of the drivers are caused by humans, and some of these are population demographics. Human beings are increasing in population, and this means that we are competing over shared resources and encroaching into landscapes with wildlife, as well as wildlife populations increase. There's expansion of agricultural activities into protected areas or buffer zones around protected areas. And this increases the human-elephant conflict occurrences. And the other part, I would say, is, lack of good policies on a broader scale. If you take a look at Kariba, there's a town called Nyamunga, which never used to be a town. That was a wildlife corridor. But some years later, like a while back, the town council decided to set that up as a town, as a high density area. And people live there now, and they are encountering human-elephant conflict on a daily basis because they were settled in a wildlife corridor. So, those are some of the drivers of human-elephant conflict. It's so difficult to change the behavior of elephants and stop them from coming into contact with people. So once you've encroached into their corridors, so those are some of the drivers, the human-induced variables. And then there are environmental variables like climate change, which is a very big one. I'm just going to touch on a couple of variables that I think are of interest. Climate change, as global warming happens and as climate change induced droughts occurred, not only has an impact on animals, but on humans as well, because, not only on humans, but animals as well, because this means that there's less vegetation for elephants to feed on. There are dry water sources in protected areas. And this means that elephants move out of protected areas and into community areas in search for food. There have been cases where elephants actually destroy grain stores, where people keep their maize and everything. Those have been destroyed, elephants taking those. And that's a climate-induced factor because they don't have enough forage within their area. In cases of transboundary areas such as Hwange, which borders with Chobe in Botswana and everything, some of the elephants can migrate into Zimbabwe during drought seasons, and that increases pressure and population numbers of elephants on the Zimbabwean side, and which means some of them are being pushed from the park into community areas in search for food and water and territories, and that increases, the amount of conflict in the area. And to top that all off, Zimbabwe is very good at conservation and has conserved elephants to a point where their populations have skyrocketed. And now Zimbabwe has approximately more or less than 100,000 elephants, the second largest herd in Southern Africa, or in Africa as a whole, actually. And, this is way above the carrying capacity of most national parks that elephants are in. But, management around what to do with these exponential increases in elephants is an issue. And that leads me to a hidden driver of human-elephant conflict, which is human-human conflict. Oftentimes you realize that foundationally, one of the biggest drivers of human-wildlife conflict, with no exception to human-elephant conflict, is human-human conflict. Think back to establishment of protected areas, excluding people from protected areas, putting fences, the old fines and fortresses tale exhibits traits of human-human conflict. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about when it comes to elephants, elephants are managed by people. And in turn, that management means that there's going to be an impact on the local communities that live near elephants. I'm sure you're all aware of CASA, which is a TFCA. I'm just using this as an example. A couple of years ago, there was a hunting ban, a trophy hunting ban in Botswana, while Zimbabwe continued with a trophy hunting ban on elephants in particular, while Zimbabwe continued on in trophy hunting. Such conflicts between how to manage different landscapes can have negative repercussions on people. So that's one example. The second example is I'll look at Campfire and CITES and the CASA one as well. And IUCN. So basically, these are international bodies that govern how elephants are utilized. IUCN has red lists and other species survival lists that look at whether an elephant is classified as endangered or not endangered. And African elephants are currently classified as endangered. Then we have CITES, which I'm sure you're aware of, that regulates the hunting and the trade of wildlife species. And currently under CITES, the trade of ivory is prohibited. And on a larger scale, on an international scale, there are complications with countries in Europe, like Germany and the UK, proposing import bans on trophy hunting. And at the end of the day, how does all this that I've said tie down to human-human conflict? All these decisions that are being made on a broader scale affect these communities, which are represented by this Campfire Association that I'm sure you're aware of again. These communities are relying on benefits from wildlife that come from activities such as trophy hunting, ecotourism, and these have been found to influence whether people can tolerate wildlife or not. And when international institutions affect whether or not people can receive benefits from these animals and they stop receiving benefits from the animals that they're in conflict with, this exacerbates human-wildlife conflict. And it also makes these campfire communities angry at the CASA institution or the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Institution, because they're having to live with conflict with elephants, but receiving no benefits for that. So I think human-human conflict is one of the leading drivers of human-elephant conflict in Zimbabwe, because one of the leading drivers again in Zimbabwe is the fact that our elephant populations are on an exponential increase. And of course, you know, people are often on two sides of the scale and somewhere in between on whether or not elephants should be sustainably used to control conflict for the greater conservation cause. And on the other end of the scale, you know, people who say that elephants have a right to exist for themselves, you know. Yeah, so that is human-human conflict. And ultimately, that conflict affects whether or not people and elephants will have extreme levels of conflict, medium conflict, or little to no conflict. So I'm just going to rush through human elephant conflict management in Zimbabwe, because you're going to have this later on in the week. Most mitigation strategies have been aimed at deterring conflict or reducing the number of occurrences of conflict. A good example is chili bombs, which have been found to be successful in certain areas where people grow chilies, communities grow chilies, which also can be good for their livelihoods. And after growing chilies, they make them into chili bricks or chili bombs, which deter elephants. Same thing with beehive fences, which have also been found to be useful in deterring elephants. And I think you will hear more about this later this week. Community education has also been a big aspect of human-elephant conflict, educating communities on how to interact with elephants when they see them coming, which pathways to use, not to walk at night, to report conflict instead of engaging in retaliation and taking the law into their own hands. A controversial one is drilling of boreholes within the national park to stop elephants, within national parks, to stop elephants from ranging outside of the park into community lands. But obviously this has been met with a lot of criticism because of the ecological impacts that drilling boreholes has in national parks. An interesting innovation in mitigation has been collaring of elephants. Unfortunately, this is a very expensive one, which can't be applied across the country as a whole. And in this situation, you know, elephants are collared with a GPS tracker that a community member can track on their phone. And when they see an elephant, you know, approaching the community area, they can alert the rest of the community to the impending threat of elephants, and people can then disperse. Whilst this is good to the lives of people, it doesn't necessarily reduce the damage to crops and everything. So there's still a bit of work that needs to be done on that front, but this is a very good stride in the right direction. And then the controversial one is compensation. Zimbabwe also recently set up a human wildlife conflict fund or policy around that, where people who have been affected by human wildlife conflicts can receive some form of compensation. But some people have critiqued it as sort of putting a band-aid on the problem, you know, on a bigger wound, which might not necessarily solve the problem. But in spite of all of these efforts to mitigate elephant conflict, or human-elephant conflict, we're still here discussing the elephant in the room, this increasing level of human-elephant conflict. And does that mean our solutions towards human-elephant conflict mitigation are not working? I'm not sure I would say that, but I would think that we are looking at human-elephant conflict from a mitigatory lens instead of a coexistence lens, something that I think would change the narrative of how humans and elephants interact in Zimbabwe. So what is coexistence? Again, I favor this definition by Carter and Linnell that says coexistence is a dynamic but sustainable state in which humans and wildlife co-adapt to living in shared landscapes where human interactions with wildlife are governed by effective institutions that ensure long-term sustainable population persistence, social legitimacy, and tolerable levels of risk. A key thing in this definition is that human-elephant coexistence or human-wildlife coexistence does not imply the absence of conflict. There will always be conflict. As long as humans and elephants continue to live in shared landscapes, there will always be conflict. But, you know, in coexistence, they live in tolerable levels of each other without driving the other to extinction or to social collapse. So the question then becomes, what's tolerance? And, you know, what I can tolerate and what you can tolerate are different things. So which brings me to coexistence strategies. I unfortunately do not have a list of coexistence strategies because I believe that coexistence looks different for every person and every community that is affected by wildlife. Human-elephant coexistence will look different from human-lion coexistence, from human-crocodile coexistence, because of the cultural and other intricate interplays in social ecological systems. So when it comes to human-elephant coexistence, it's important to ask, you know, who are we doing coexistence for? If I'm doing coexistence for myself as a researcher, it's so easy. I've got a long list of what works for coexistence. Benefits from wildlife or excluding people from the protected areas as a practitioner, whatever works for you. But when we want to look at practical and meaningful pathways to human-elephant coexistence, we have to go back to the drawing board, to the people who are affected by conflict. So elephants are often represented by conservation biologists, and we know what they need. Scientists know what they need. They know the type of landscapes that they need. But a less heard voice is the communities that live alongside protected areas and are in conflict with these people. Why don't we as researchers and practitioners go back to the drawing board and ask the communities, different communities, in Hwange, in Kariba, in Bire, in Gonorrhea, and ask them, what is coexistence to you? What would it take for you to live in tolerable level, to accept tolerable conflict with elephants? You know, there's no one way or the other. We're going to be living in shared landscapes. And some might say, you know what, if I'm receiving benefits from conservation of these elephants, if they eat my field, that's fair and fine, because the conservation of elephants is offering me an alternative livelihood. Whereas someone else in another community, benefits might not work for them, you know? So it's important to really understand what coexistence means to the people who live with wildlife and to co-produce pathways to human-elephant coexistence with those people. So I definitely can't sit here and give you the answers to coexistence strategies because I don't live in Hwange and I don't live in Gonorrhea or in Bire or in Binga. But what I do know from my research is that, you know, all of these strategies to date tend to be, most of them, there have been good strides in engaging communities. But a majority of them are made, and there's always tokenism and engagement with local communities. You create your own questionnaires and your own hypotheses as a researcher on what you think will work. And then I go with those to the community and have them answer those things. But what about co-producing it's been found that when communities are involved in participatory approaches, there's more adaptation and more acceptance of strategies that are put in place and less resentment towards institutions. And that's why I say again, human conflict, because sometimes local communities will kill an elephant because they're disgruntled against Zimparks. And so, treating them as partners and mapping coexistence with them, I think is an effective way and the strategy that I recommend in my presentation today. And as I come to the end of my presentation, I'll leave you with this thought that I have as I am often grappled and underneath the power of research on what can work in human-wildlife coexistence. I realize that it's not passive. It definitely is an act of courage to go and talk to people who have trauma from conflict, and from those people to talk to you and open up. It's a matter of compromise on their part, on our part as humans, not putting our own personal values ahead of the need of the people who live with wildlife, and commitment to shared futures with wildlife. With that, I thank you, and I'm looking forward to any questions or thoughts you might have on what I've just said.
Thank you so much, Yoranda. I love the way you have asked important questions that people don't get to ask. We have a lot of solutions, but why is the conflict still going on? And I love the way you've tackled them, given us answers. You've made us think of things that we don't think of. Thank you so much. And now we're going to open the floor for questions. If you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand and I'll give you a chance to unmute and ask your question.
Stella, there's a question from Joel Sakimpa.
Oh, it's in the chat. Okay, I can see Simon has his hand up, so I'll just check the question as Simon unmutes and asks his question. Simon, would you please unmute and ask your question?
Good morning.
Good morning, Simon. It's good to have you back.
Thank you. My question is direct to Dr. Lindy Botha, not sorry, to Yolanda Mutiima. And I was asking, how do local people perceive elephant today compared to 10 years ago? Has education or policy shifted attitudes? And another one, what specific community-based strategies have proven more sustainable in reducing the conflicts with elephants?
So I remember your second question, which is what strategies have proved effective. And the first one is, have perceptions changed over 10 years? Okay. Well, to date, I'm not aware of strategies that have actually looked at perceptions towards elephant on a 10-year scale. But that a comparative analysis that we can actually draw empirical results. But my response will generally be from what I know from literature and from practice. It depends. It's context specific. That's the answer I'll give you. Conservation is very, 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 very context specific. So, for people in Kariba, perceptions towards elephants might continue to be the same throughout the 10-year period, or even decline. Whereas for people in Wange and places where there have been initiatives against deterrence, and in Cholocho, they've tried behind fences. I'm assuming that, perceptions have actually improved. But then again, I can't speak for those communities because I haven't done that research. But what I can say to you is that, that question cannot be asked on a broad scale, because all conservation issues are context specific. And there's so many things that influence perceptions depending on where you are. So, in places where people are receiving benefits from conservation of elephants, definitely perceptions might be better compared to places where people are not receiving benefits, and the cost benefits, the cost of living with elephants are outweighing the benefits. But I think it's very interesting to actually compare on a 10-year scale on what that has looked like. But again, what would you be comparing against? Are there factors that have changed in the management of elephants in those areas or conflict management of those areas or not. But I think it's Kudakwashi's presentation tomorrow where he speaks on beehive fences. I think it will give us more insights as to whether, those strategies have actually been meaningful. And then your second question was?
What specific community-based strategies have proven most sustainable in reducing conflict with the elephants?
Okay. So again, I think something I should have mentioned in the presentation is that human-elephant conflict is so dynamic. Human-wildlife conflict, again, is so dynamic. Strategies that work today might not work tomorrow. But the GPS collaring that I showed you has proven to be working, like alerting people that elephants are coming and getting people to move into their house has been accepted very well. And like I said, coexistence doesn't mean elephants are no longer eating people's fields, but it means that people have less of an outcry to the existence of elephants. So that has proved to be working well as the beehive fences. Those people that have implemented them vouch for them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Simon.
Thank you, Simon, for your questions, and thank you, Yolanda, for taking them. And now I can see there is a hand from Umo Isao. Umo, would you please unmute and ask your questions? Your question, I mean.
Yes, thank you so much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining from. But from Nigeria, it's good morning. I think it's a good conversation. I plan to be settled to join this conversation because it directly impacts in community need that is currently on my table now. Though I'm on transit, I was expecting before then I should be seated in my office. But however, I want to bring to attention to elephant-human conflict that is occurring in Boki local government area of Cross River States. They wrote to our organization last week highlighting that there are lots of destructions in terms of their community livelihoods, in terms of trade to human beings from elephants from the Cross River State National Park. So when I saw this conversation, I said it was a timely one for us to strategize, for us to come up with a best way to approach it, because a lot of people have been displaced and the management of Cross River National Park has not been able to give a way forward to the community, while some of them even borrowed money to plant plantain, cocoa, and the rest. But timely, for the past 3 years, elephant has been threatening, destroying those things. So my submission is, how do we go about this as a group? Thank you.
Wow. That is a very big question of solving human-elephant conflicts in your state. I honestly do not have an answer off the bat for you because I have no idea of the dynamics of human-elephant conflict in your state and what the drivers are. And I think you mentioned people being displaced. So honestly, I do not have an answer for you because I am not very familiar with conservation in Nigeria. But I think it would be good to link up after this and chat more on what, exactly is going on there. I think it's a very long conversation that cannot be answered in one session. I can't do justice to that in one statement, rather,
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. And thank you, Yolanda. I think, you need to get in touch to have a discussion on this, Thank you. So there is another question from Philip in the chat. Philip says, what are the possible solutions to conflicts that arise from government from governments due to failing to have a fair share with the local communities near the elephant inhabited areas.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's a very interesting question, and I'm glad you're bringing out that human conflict again, dynamic again. And it is a thing, which is why some of the programs in Zimbabwe have collapsed, like the Campfire program. I understand that now it is being rebuilt, but one of the reasons for its collapse was that there was no genuine benefit sharing. Whilst the power, the powers devolved to local communities and RITCs, there was still a lot of corruption in those areas. And I think it's important, the best way to address that conflict is actually through addressing the policy of surrounding benefit sharing, what percentage goes to people, and having that reviewed as researchers, bringing those things to light, that communities in this particular area are supposed to be receiving benefits but are not receiving benefits. So the short and end answer to that is actually publicly calling out the government on failing to honor their commitment, or failing to adhere to policies that require local communities to receive a share of benefits that arise from conservation of elephants. So yeah, I think it's hard but straightforward, calling out the government on those things in whatever capacity you have as a conservation researcher or practitioner.
Thank you so much, Philip, for the question, and thank you, Yoranda, for the answer. And right now, we are going to move on, but if you still have questions for Yoranda, keep them coming in the chat.
Stella?
And we are going to have Yoranda again.
So my question is, under the drivers of human-elephant conflict, and Yolanda mentioned several variables, and one of them being human conflict, I guess something like that. So I just want clarification on that. How does that happen?
Okay. So the basis of human conflict, and my argument of including it as a driver of human-elephant conflict, is that for the context of Zimbabwe, again, this might not apply for places like Nigeria or Kenya, depending on the elephant populations that are there. For cases such as Zimbabwe, we have a lot of elephants that exceed the carrying capacity. And because elephants are exceeding the carrying capacity of protected areas, it means that they range into into communal areas, because there's not enough space for them in the national parks. So they range into protected areas. So the basis of stopping them from ranging into protected areas is to actually just manage their populations and stop them from becoming, from exponentially increasing more than the land can carry. But last year, the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority proposed a cull on elephants in Zimbabwe for a number of reasons: conflict, drought, and a lot of reasons. But there was an outrage, an international outcry on, this is not the right thing to do, it's unethical, etc. So that, coupled with other restrictions, such as whether or not, you can trade in elephant ivory, whether or not you can actually hunt elephants, all of these things end up affecting whether or not you have exponentially increasing populations, or whether you have populations that are within your carrying capacity. And this conflict is not between an elephant and a human being. It's between one human being who is pro-sustainable use or hunting of wildlife and killing of wildlife, versus another human being who believes that an animal should just continue to live, or an elephant has the right to exist in its majesty for itself. So because there are different priorities between human beings, it impacts whether or not you have elephants that exceed their carrying capacity, or elephants that do not exceed their carrying capacity.
Thank you so much, Yoranda.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, that was a very interesting question. All right. So reaching this time, I would like to thank you, Yoranda, for your presentation. It has made us start thinking a lot, and yeah, that was really incredible.